So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie Evener, the Director of Library Services for the university. I'm happy to present this webinar to you today on open access publishing. Know that the focus of today's presentation will be on publishing research articles, though the information I'll be sharing could be applicable to other formats as well. The webinar today is in honor of Open Access Week, which is observed internationally to draw attention to the benefits of open access and make it a, quote, new norm in scholarship and research. For more information, you can visit openaccessweek.org. Open access, or OA, refers to information that is online, unrestricted, and freely available to read. OA literature typically has less copyright restrictions than more traditionally published work, which allows it to be more widely shared and accessed. True open access removes not only the barrier of cost, but also the barrier of copyright. We've all faced the challenge of wanting to use a copyrighted journal article in a course or something like that and have run into the barrier of how to share the article without violating copyright. Open access articles often, but not always, are available to share, copy, or repost without any issues. So I want to clarify here that what this means for the author. That's kind of the focus of the webinar, is looking at this open access publishing from an author point of view. So this does not mean that the author loses copyright ownership of their work. In fact, most open access options will allow you as the author to keep more rights to your work than a copyright agreement from a conventional publisher will. With conventional publishers, authors typically do not own the final published and formatted version of their article. But with open access, even the final version is yours to do with what you wish. So I've definitely heard stories from faculty members, things like that, who want to, for example, use an article that they authored in a course that they're teaching, but they can't, because without paying royalty, the copyright fees and things like that, because they do not own that final published article. And that is not the case with open access. It's you retain that work. There's even a few journals I've come across that have just very, very restrictive copyright agreements that they have authors sign in the conventional publishing world. And open access journals are a lot more open about that sort of thing, and authors do keep more rights. Also, articles published open access are still copyrighted. They are not public domain, which means something that has no copyright owner and therefore belongs to the public at large. So public domain is, there is no copyright ownership. With open access, the author still does own the copyright. There is copyright ownership. The copyright holder, which is the author, says up front that they want to give others permission to use and share their work. So therefore, the openness of the article is dependent on copyright holder or author consent. Many open access publications do this through Creative Commons licenses. I'm not going to do more than mention Creative Commons in this session, but I will focus more on it during the Finding and Using Open Access Content webinar on Thursday. Open access has some clear benefits for society, particularly in our realm of medicine and health sciences. First, a lot of research is funded through grants from government agencies or public research universities. Until fairly recently, the public has paid for that research essentially twice. First, in tax dollars to fund the grants, and second, to access the research output to read the resultant article in a journal, for example. The same for research universities. They are funding research projects whose output their libraries must pay for through expensive journal subscriptions. The journals who are earning the money from the research output pay nothing for their content because peer reviewers and researchers are not paid for their work. To give you an example, or up here in the corner, there's the Did You Know box. Elsevier, who's one of the major academic publishers, scholarly publishers, in 2017 they reported a profit margin of 36.8%. Wolters Kluwer's, which does Ovid, was 22.8%. So those are scholarly publishers. And then if you're looking at kind of these tech firms that we consider, to be real money makers, Apple, their 2017 profit margin was 21.1%. Google's was 11.4%. So the academic publishers, their profit margins are a lot higher than a typical company. And most of that comes from a lot of times the people who are, or the institutions who are paying for that research to be created in the first place. More and more funding agencies, including the National Institutes of Health, are requiring that research funded through their grants be available, open, and publicly. The NIH policy requires scientists to submit final peer-reviewed journal manuscripts that arise from NIH funds to PubMed Central immediately upon acceptance for publication. Another benefit is the democratization of research. With open access, poorer countries have the same access to crucial research as richer countries, leading to better patient care, better health, and better original research in developing countries. Another benefit is the advancement of research and science. Remember that communicating the results of research is an essential component of the research process. Research and scholarship is a conversation. New insights and discoveries occur over time as a result of competing perspectives and interpretations. This is one reason we cite our sources, so our readers know whose work we are responding to. If few people can hear what you have to say because of paywalls, for example, the conversation won't last long. And finally, open access also makes it easier for researchers to collaborate, even globally and across disciplines, to solve difficult global issues like HIV/AIDS, opioids, mental health, and nutrition. If your work is available in an open access format, there are definite benefits to that. Scholarly works like articles are usually written for impact rather than for money, which is why scholarly journals don't pay researchers for their articles. Impact can lead to more money when it leads to tenure or promotion, for example. So a lot of times the researchers who are doing this research, publishing these articles, they are doing so for purposes of visibility, getting that information out there, prestige, the tenure process, the promotion process, all of those sorts of things. And so they're not paid for that, at least not directly from the journals who are publishing their work. Open access articles have higher visibility than subscription articles simply because they are more easily accessible by more people. In this one particular study, open access articles had 89% higher full text downloads, 42% higher PDF downloads, and 23% higher unique visitors than subscription articles. There's also an increased impact that goes along with that. There are quite a few studies out there that show more citations per year for open access articles than non-open access articles. And again, that's just because they're accessible, particularly by researchers or people who may not have access to a library that's paying for this from conventional publishers. When they hit a paywall, they're probably not going to pay. And instead, they're going to use an article that they can access more easily. So increased visibility, increased impact. So here you're probably thinking, well, what about impact factor? In the academic world, impact factor is a huge component of prestige and at many institutions, tenure or promotion. A journal's impact factor is a calculation based on the yearly average number of citations to recent articles published in that journal. It's often used to measure how important a journal is in its field. However, many experts say that basing the quality of an individual research article, and therefore the individual researchers themselves, on the impact factor of the journal in which it is published is, quote, based on false beliefs and unwarranted inferences. It's used as a measure to assess researchers primarily because it's convenient and concrete. It's much more complicated and subjective for tenure and promotion committees to actually evaluate the research methods used in the study. Many in the academic and scientific publishing world are pushing for article level metrics, also called ALMs, to take the place of journal impact factors. ALMs include things like altmetrics tracked through platforms like PlumX. These track not only official citations, but also visibility through things like social media mentions, being mentioned in the news, and actual usage like downloads, all on the individual article level rather than on the journal level. I bring this up because typically the journals with the highest impact factors are still the conventionally published journals, and that might discourage some researchers from publishing in open access journals. However, publishing in an open access journal is not the only way to publish open access. Okay, so now I want to talk about types of open access. In the open access world, there are typically 3 types of open access publishing models that are recognized. First, gold open access is called such because it is the, quote, gold standard according to the open access movement. Gold open access is when a publication is entirely open access. Some examples are the Open Journal of Occupational Therapy and the International Journal of Physiotherapy. Green open access is also called self-archiving. This is when a researcher publishes in a traditional journal, a conventionally published journal, but then makes their copy of the full-text article available freely online, often through an institutional repository like RSOAR at USA, or potentially in an open database like ERIC or PubMed Central. With green open access, the article on the publisher site requires payment, but the full text is available freely elsewhere online. Because of that, green open access articles can be a bit more difficult to find. The publisher site, for example, is not going to have a redirect link or, here's this article for sale, and oh, by the way, if you want it for free, here's a link. So you have to sometimes do a little bit of digging to get to the green open access versions of articles. And then finally, hybrid open access is a growing practice among conventional publishers, sort of as their answer to the open access movement. Hybrid means that though the journal as a whole is not open access, when an article is accepted for publication, the authors can choose to make their individual article open access. To do so, the authors must pay an article processing fee, which can range from $500 to $5,000 depending on the publisher and the journal. The conventional publishing option, not open access, has no article processing fee in that case. Elsevier, of the huge profit margins we saw earlier, claims that they are the second largest open access publisher in the world with over 1,850 journals with hybrid options. One question I hear a lot with open access publishing options is, what is this fee all about? I know it's a concern for many researchers who are considering publishing open access, and to many, it's even a red flag of, potentially is this a predatory journal? Let me say that we as a library are planning a separate webinar all about predatory journals, warning signs to look for, that sort of a thing. We didn't want to tie that webinar too closely with Open Access Week this week because it's myth that open access and predatory are one and the same. Predatory journals could use either an open access or a conventional publishing model, though it's true that more predatory journals use the open access model simply because the setup is a little bit easier. But let's focus on the legitimate open access journals. While scholarly publishing has very little overhead, content is free, reviewers are free, and sometimes even editing is free, there are still some costs involved, including hosting the digital platform and possibly paying some staff or marketing costs, those sorts of things. Some gold open access journals charge a publishing fee to cover those costs, since they won't make money from selling the article content. They need revenue, in other words, to even stay afloat. One prominent example is the nonprofit open access publisher PLOS, P-L-O-S. They charge article processing charges to cover their overhead, but they are very clear about their mission as a publisher and transparent about their finances, to the point of providing all their financial documents right on their website. So that's an example of an open access publisher who charges these fees, but has legitimate reason to, and it's what makes their open access model work, essentially. Hybrid open access options almost always include paying a fee, largely because if it was free to choose the open access option, everyone would choose it and the journal wouldn't make money. So as a reminder, hybrid is when a conventionally published journal gives authors the option of paying a fee in order to make their individual article open access, even though the journal itself is not open access. So there are also gold open access journals that are published through the big publishers like Elsevier and that charge publishing fees. These don't really make sense to me other than, of course, the profit and business motive. For example, if Elsevier has a handful, 100 so gold open access journals, to me, they should be able to keep those journals afloat with the revenue that they have from their conventionally published journals, and so then they shouldn't need to charge an article processing fee. So it should be enough, the revenue from their conventional journals should be more than enough to cover the costs associated with the few Gold Open Access journals they publish. So they do charge fees if it's a Gold Open Access journal from a conventional publisher sometimes, but that fee is really, doesn't serve a real purpose in my opinion. Okay, so that said, open access does not always mean paying a fee. Many Gold Open Access journals are sponsored through organizations or institutions with primary goals other than scholarly publishing, and so they don't need publishing fees to support the overhead costs of their journals. As you can see here, 2/3 of Gold Open Access journals do not charge fees. For example, the Journal of the Medical Library Association is a Gold Open Access journal with no publishing fees because the journal's sponsor, the Medical Library Association, covers the overhead costs for the journal through its other revenue streams like membership dues and the like. I've talked in other sessions about the capability of our SOAR at USA platform to host an online journal. Such a journal sponsored through USA would also not need or want to charge publishing fees because overhead costs would be covered by other areas of the university. For example, the library is paying for the platform, the editing and peer reviewing is done by faculty or student volunteers or as part of a student course credit or faculty service. However, when there are fees for publishing open access in any of the formats, that does not necessarily mean that you're taking out your own wallet, your own debit card, and paying those personally out of pocket. Many researchers write these fees into their research grant applications, whether those grants are through government agencies or other sponsoring institutions. PLOS Plus, who I mentioned earlier, they were founded as a nonprofit open access publisher, and they provide a resource guide with lists of institutions and funders that provide researchers with open access fee assistance. So finally, Green Open Access never involves a fee. So remember, Green Open Access is self-archiving. So that's when you publish in a conventional journal or an open access journal, and then you make that article, your individual article, available somewhere else. For example, in SOAR at USA, our institutional repository. So depending on the publisher, there may be restrictions about when you can post your copy and what version you're permitted to post, but there's no cost to self-archive. Of course, my top recommendation for self-archiving is to submit to SOAR at USA, our university's institutional repository. Plus, don't forget that if you submit before the end of this weekend, Sunday, October 28th, 2018, you'll be entered into our drawing to win one of 2 $25 Amazon gift cards. So in this case, you may even get paid to publish through Green Open Access. So the bottom line here is don't be afraid of fees to publish open access. But if it's really not realistic to pay fees, don't dismiss open access as an option altogether, because there's a lot of opportunity to post or to publish open access without paying any fees at all. You might be saying, well, how can I publish open access? My first piece of advice is when applying for grants, you can include funds for open access publishing fees. You can submit to reputable, peer-reviewed Gold Open Access journals when writing articles for publication. And here I want to introduce you to doaj.org, which is the Directory of Open Access Journals. Right, so this is the Directory of Open Access Journals. It works as a database as well as a list of open access journals. So you can have either journal or articles checkmarked here. But if you're looking for an open access journal to publish in, for example, you might want to come here and type in, whatever discipline you have to get an idea of the journals available. And quite a few, 153 come up for nursing, and then you can narrow that even further. They have a limiter to say, I don't want to include any journals that charge article processing fees. So no, and that drops us down to 101. We can also see, so you'll notice a lot of these are foreign language journals. So we can say, okay, I only want to see full text languages English, and that brings us down even more. And also peer review. Another myth that I hear a lot is that open access journals are not peer reviewed. Peer review has nothing to do with publishing model. Just like there are some conventionally published journals that aren't peer reviewed, there are also a lot of open access journals that are peer reviewed. Kind of in your minds have you separate the idea of publishing model and peer review, because there's no correlation between the two. Either conventionally published or open access journals can be peer reviewed or not. So as you can see here, rather than saying this journal is peer reviewed or this journal isn't peer reviewed, it lets you limit by what kind of peer review that journal does. Double blind, blind peer review, open peer review. So that kind of indicates that everything within the directory of open access journals is a peer-reviewed, reputable journal. In order to be listed in the directory of open access journals, a journal has to apply. The committee looks at the journal, does quality checks before it approves it to be a part of the directory of open access journals. These are reputable journals for sure. So the green check mark here means that that was a journal that was added to the directory after March 2014. And what happened in March 2014 is that the directory of open access journal changed their standards, essentially. They made their standards more restrictive. They made their standards harder to reach. With the green check mark, that indicates that this journal really it's a good journal because it met the more restrictive criteria that was in place as of March 2014. They also have something called the DOAJ seal, and you can limit by that, and only one in here has that. This journal, Veterinary Evidence, has the Directory of Open Access Journal seal, and that seal essentially means that journal has a high commitment to open access. There's different criteria that they look at having to do with, does the journal use DOIs? Does the journal, allow authors to keep their full copyright ownership of the article? Those sorts of things. So this is definitely a great site to go to if you're looking to publish in a gold open access journal. If you don't want to publish in a gold open access journal, if you don't want to kind of go that far, when your research is accepted, something else you can do is when your research is accepted for publication in a conventionally published journal, consider the hybrid open access options they may offer. And I definitely know that can be tricky. So myself, I've done a little bit of everything in open access, I guess you can say. I've published in a gold open access journal that did not have article processing fees. I've published in a conventionally published journal that had the hybrid option, and I think the fee was $2,000, and I didn't write the article with any sort of grant or anything like that, and I did not pay the fee to have that article be open access. I really wanted to, but I just couldn't, it was not doable. But since then, I have made that article available through SOAR, so it is self-archived through Green Open Access. So consider, if you can, the hybrid open access option if you're publishing in a conventionally published journal. When you sign, this is so important, when you sign a copyright agreement with a conventional publisher, be aware of your rights and the publisher's restrictions for self-archiving. I've seen a few journals, to name a couple, the Journal of Athletic Training is an example, and the International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy is another example, that have copyright agreements that essentially strips the authors of their ownership of that article. Leave the authors with almost no ownership and no control over their own work. Don't allow them to self-archive, except when required by your grant. Like I was mentioning the NIH grant, they're required to make that open access through PubMed Central. So the Journal of Athletic Training, for example, the only place that allows self-archiving is PubMed Central, and that's because of the NIH grant rules. But it would not, those journals would not allow self-archiving of any version of the article in SOAR at USA, for example, or anywhere else. So it's really important that you don't just kind of blindly sign those copyright agreements, but that you are aware of what you're signing and what you're saying, what you're giving away, essentially, that you're giving your rights away to the publisher for nothing in return. You're not being paid for it or anything like that. So I really think that that's very important when you're publishing. So if you are publishing with a conventional publisher who allows self-archiving, then I definitely encourage you to self-archive your articles. Research posters are easy because there's no question of who owns the copyright to those. Book chapters can kind of be on the same page as articles, where it depends on the publisher and what they allow and the copyright agreement that you signed. But I would encourage you to self-archive those in SOAR at USA. For our USA faculty and staff members can do that. And also, if you work with a journal as a peer reviewer, an editor, something like that, I would really advise you or recommend that you encourage those journals to adopt more open access friendly policies where appropriate and where you can. We've talked about the benefits of that for individual researchers as well as for society. And, you know, I think every journal can be a little bit more open access. You know, not that it's realistic for every journal to become a gold open access journal, but maybe that's, you know, allowing a wider variety of self-archiving or letting authors retain copyright to their work and just give the journal permission to publish it on their behalf, sort of a thing. Okay, if you're looking for more information on open access, I would encourage you to like and follow the USA Library's Facebook page. This week for Open Access Week, we are having posts every day about open access specifically. So you can follow the posts there, or even if you don't want to, you know, follow and like the page, if you go to that page, you can scroll through and see what we've shared already today and yesterday, and check back later in the week because we've got new posts scheduled every day. Also, we have new on the library's website a guide on open access. So I would encourage you to check that out. That's just library.usa.edu/open-access. And then Thursday, this Thursday, October 25th at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, I'll be hosting a Finding and Using Open Access Content webinar. I'll be talking about different sites to find open access content, not just articles, but images, books, videos, all those sorts of things. You know, using them as far as Creative Commons licenses, copyright sorts of things. So that'll be the topic on this Thursday, and that one will also be recorded. And also, I've mentioned SOAR at USA, our institutional repository, quite a bit in this webinar. So I wanted to give you a link here. That is the archive to the SOAR at USA webinar that I did last month. You can watch that on the library's website. If you don't remember the link or that sort of thing, you can just go to the library's website and under events, go to archive, and you'll see it listed there. These are some of the references from my presentation. Thank you all for attending, and feel free to reach out later with any questions that you might have. Thank you, everybody.